Hi students, and welcome to another e-lesson video. This one is your introduction to the Q1 synthesis essay. As with all of these videos, please feel free to pause and rewind at any time to rewatch, take notes, or get caught up. Here's what this video is going to deal with. First of all, we're going to talk once again about the AP Lang free response section, just as kind of a reminder of what that looks like. We're going to talk about the Q1 writing task itself, planning and organizing the essay, good practices and bad practices. Once again, the AP Lang free response section consists of the whole exam consists of two sections. Got a multiple choice section that's worth 45% of the score, and the free response section, which is your three essays, is worth 55% of the score. Section 2, again, has three free response or essay questions. The Q1, the synthesis essay, the Q2, rhetorical analysis essay, and the Q3, which is your free response question that's a persuasive essay. The timing on the test, you get a 15-minute planning period for the two essays, and then 2 hours to compose those essays, and that's, of course, following the 1 hour section 1. All right, the writing task, the Q1. Q1 is what's called a synthesis question, and we've already talked about some of this in class. You're given a topic to consider. The issue is always going to be something concrete, though. It's never going to be something philosophical like you'll see on the Q3. Usually the topic is something that's actually topical, something people right now are debating in the U.S. You're then given a series of sources to read which all deal with this topic and asked to establish and develop a position on that issue. And in so doing, you're required to incorporate or refer to, I believe, are the language of the instructions, refer to or make reference to at least 3 of the sources from the packet. Let's take a look at some samples. Here is a recent prompt from 2012, and this is more what you're going to see on the actual exam. When the Q1 originally came out back in 2007, it was originally an expository essay prompt. Now it's an argumentative prompt as of 2012. So here's the kind of question you might see. You're given a topic here. The United States Postal Service has delivered communications for more than 2 centuries. During the 19th century, the USPS helped to expand the boundaries of the United States by providing efficient, reliable communication across the country. Between 1790 and 1860 alone, the number of post offices in the United States grew from 75 to over 28,000. With this growth came job opportunities for postal workers and a boom in the cross-country rail system. The 20th century brought substantial growth to the USPS, including large package delivery and air mail. Over the past decade, however, total mail volume has decreased considerably as competition from electronic mail and various package delivery companies has taken business away from the USPS. The loss of revenue has prompted the USPS to consider cutting back on delivery days and other services. Carefully read the following 7 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Then synthesize information from at least 3 of the sources and incorporate it into a coherent, well-developed essay that argues a clear position on whether the USPS should be restructured to meet the needs of a changing world, and if so, how. Make sure your argument is central. Use the sources to illustrate and support your reasoning. Avoid merely summarizing the sources. Indicate clearly which sources you are drawing from, whether through direct quotation, paraphrase, or summary. You may cite the sources as source A, source B, etc., or by using the descriptions in parentheses. So this is what your modern Q1 prompt looks like. It starts with a topic just to kind of introduce you to what the prompt is about. Then your writing task is in the next paragraph, and then the last paragraph just gives you some helpful hints on what to do and what not to do to be successful on the Q1. Making sure your argument is central. We've talked about that in class. Avoid merely summarizing the sources. That's put there for those students who don't really ever make an argument. They just kind of give us an overview of the sources. Indicate clearly which sources you are drawing from. That means integrating your quotations, introducing quotations, and citing them as source A, source B, or by the descriptions in parentheses. Either one is fine. Okay, so yeah, after the prompt sheet, you've seen this before, a series of between 5 and 8 sources to look at. Some text, some visuals. There we've got a visual that I'll talk about here in a minute, one of the weird ones. Here's another one. This one, I'm not going to bother reading it all to you again. This is one of the older style of ones. You might see when we do them in class some that look like this. They've just kind of rearranged it. They've put the introduction in the middle and the assignment at the end. This one's about daylight saving time. Okay, and so all of your sources are going to be about daylight saving time. And I believe the assignment is to argue whether or not the United States should still have daylight saving time, basically. In recent years, I've also seen topics like whether or not the penny should be discontinued from our currency, the merits of locavorism, which is those individuals who have gone to predominantly locally sourced food diets, and all kinds of topics. It's always something very concrete and something that something that is topical to today. Planning and organizing the essay, I have 4 simple steps for planning and organizing the Q1. This one, there's more steps to this process because you're given the 15-minute reading and planning period to do these. So I've kind of broken this down a little bit more. You should always begin by trying to break the issue down into just 2 sides. I know that we've talked about in class how the issues they give you are going to be far more complex than just having a pro and having a con side. But for now, when you're just trying to understand the issue, try to just break it down into 2 sides. Then read your sources. At the bottom of each source, write a single sentence response. We've practiced writing responses in paragraphs. You don't have time to do that when you're planning out the essay, but you do have time to at least write one good sentence at the bottom of each source. The sentence could be a question. You could be questioning something from the author or stating something, concurring what the author says, challenging directly what the author says, qualifying something the author says. You just need to write something short which engages the source in conversation. That just kind of throws you into the middle of the discussion. Once you've done that, once you've looked at all your sources, go back to the prompt page and start fleshing out the complexities and subtleties of the topic. This is where you jot down a series of questions that must be addressed with this issue like we've practiced in class. This ultimately will just help fuel your discussion, acknowledging the full range of things to be considered. Finally, once you've written that series of questions, establish your position and plan your discussion. Write a crude working thesis. Remember, it's just a working thesis. It shouldn't go in the intro of your paragraph. But make sure that whatever working thesis you come up with does reflect the complexity of the topic so that your writing will reflect the complexity of the topic. And then compose a crude outline like you've done before and go. All right, organize this essay just like you would any argumentative essay. Since we've already studied the Q3, you've already got some ideas on that. The things with the Q1 to keep in mind, again, keep your argument central. Use those sources only to enhance your argument. Use the sources to support your argument, to illustrate your argument. Use those sources as ideas to argue against, to refute, rebut. Use those sources to bring up ideas that you can then qualify, those sorts of things. Some good practices with the Q1 essay. First one I'm going to talk about is using a blend of paraphrase and quotation. Quoting takes longer. It just physically takes longer to go back and check your exact wording. But quoting is necessary. It can be helpful in clearly expressing a source's ideas. So my rule of thumb is this: quote those words and phrases which are essential to communicating the author's meaning. Paraphrase everything else, though, because it's faster. Another good practice, blending quotations into your sentences. You have to do this. Introduce all source material in such a way that the reader knows immediately what you are quoting, with introductory phrases, that sort of thing, according to source A, or source B states that sort of thing. Make sure also when you're integrating quotations into your own sentences and you're chopping up those quotes, make sure your entire sentence is grammatically correct and actually reads like a sentence. Framing quotations, we've talked about this a little bit. Either use a lead-in sentence or follow-up commentary anytime you pull in source material. Never let a quotation or paraphrase state or suggest anything that you don't actually state in your own words. Next good practice, using source bias to your advantage. Some sources, not all, some sources may have some sort of bias that you can use in your discussion. Bias can be used in a lot of ways. It can give you ammunition to challenge those viewpoints you disagree with. If you agree with a bias source, then you can build some ethos by conceding that that bias exists. Either way, you can use bias to your advantage. You don't have to just ignore the bias source. Another good practice, referring to the sources by their letter. I know this sounds weird. Yeah, source C disagrees, arguing that the current generation of students, or according to source F, American students. I know that sounds weird and you'd much rather cite someone's name or the title of a text. However, College Board encourages this. They actually encourage this. They write it on every single prompt. They say you can simply refer to the sources by letter. And that's fine. They know that you're under a 40-minute time crunch. So going back to find the author's name or going back to copy down the text's name, it's just a waste of time. So use source C, source F, source A, whatever. Just pretend like those are the names of the pieces or those are the names of the author, okay? Finally, my favorite good practice here, I think there's one more after this, but this is obviously my favorite, ignoring the weird visual source. A minute ago, I stopped on a visual source with that Postal Service prompt. It was the photograph of the little post office with a flag waving next to it. You know, most of the visual sources, your charts, your graphs, your cartoons, your advertisements even, they're useful in some way. You can work those into a synthesis essay. Sometimes, though, there are some visuals which are just plain weird to try and work into an essay. I mean, there's ways to work in and cite photographs and drawings and that sort of thing, but if you can't use it easily, don't. I'm the kind of writer that I'd rather not sit there and try to figure out what College Board wants me to take away from a photograph of a penny, which, yes, they did do that on the penny prompt that I told you about. I'd rather just ignore it, okay, because you only have to use 3 sources. Finally, my good practices, and this is a carryover from the Q3, keep in mind that you're writing an argument. At the end of the day, this is, yes, assessing how well you can synthesize ideas into your own position, but you're still writing an argumentative paper. You want to employ good rhetorical strategies of your own. Your argument, your logos must be central. Supplement this with building and maintaining credibility, your ethos, and with measured, relevant emotional appeals, your pathos. Some of my bad practices, using floating quotations, of course. Quotations which aren't introduced and embedded into sentences are really disorienting to the reader, so don't do this. You can't just drop quotations in. Also, forcing yourself to use more than 3 sources. If it helps your discussion, use as many sources as you want. Use all of them if you want. But keep in mind, there is no prize, there is no bump in points for using more than a minimum 3. The AP readers aren't sitting there saying, oh, but this student used 4 sources, that's a point bump. No, not at all. If you use the 3, you can score a 9. Okay, and there's not really, I can't really see how forcing yourself to use more than 3 would actually help you. Because of this, here's another bad practice: restricting your sources, restricting your discussion to only those issues discussed in the sources. A lot of students seem to think that if they have a good idea that's not discussed anywhere in the sources, they can't bring it up. But no, if you think of something that the sources don't seem to address, do bring that up. Keep in mind, this is still a persuasive essay that asks you to keep your argument central. There is no need to stick strictly to what the sources discuss. Also, there is no need to, I've seen some students try to do this, force themselves to balance out where they use their source material. There's no need for that. You don't have to make sure that you use, one source in one paragraph and then one source in your next paragraph and one source in your next paragraph. You could refer to all 3 of your minimum 3 sources in your introduction, potentially. I don't know how you'd ever do that. And then the rest of the passage, or the rest of your discussion, you could just make completely different arguments that the sources really don't address. Again, I'm pointing out an extreme example here, but you don't have to balance out where your sources are used. Also, feel free to refer to sources that are not included in the packet. If you want to cite Thoreau or Plato or use World War I as an example, use it. You're not restricted to only the sources and the issues they discuss. The sources are there to inform you, not box you in. Another bad practice: if you start with this essay, which a lot of you will, it's the very first one, it's the Q1, write it quickly. Well, here's what I mean by this. You've just spent, you start writing, you've just spent your 15-minute reading period reading and thinking, and most of that 15-minute period has been spent looking at the Q1 sources and thinking about the Q1. You can, because you've already got your reading and consideration and hopefully your planning out of the way, you can probably knock this essay out in a good 30 to 35 minutes. So don't sit there and force yourself to use the full recommended 40 minutes on the Q1. This is a place where you can actually save some time and store it up for later. Remember, you're going to be starting your Q2 and your Q3 without a reading period. In that 15-minute reading period, as we're going to talk about strategies in class, sure, you might have glanced at the Q1 and or the Q2 and the Q3, but most of that 15 minutes was spent on the Q1. So why not start with the Q1 and knock out the easier essay in a quick amount of time, the one that you're most familiar with, and save yourself some time on the back end for those 2 essays you haven't really planned out yet. Thanks for watching. That's all I have for this introduction to the Q1 synthesis essay. Please feel free to watch again if you missed anything, and I'll see you in class.